emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and,
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 1394.GE4130, certificate number 24180. The video game crash of 1983.
Can you believe we haven't done a video game show?
Yeah, we have done almost 500 entries in the Omnibus, and none are about what is probably the most largest and most profitable entertainment sector in the world today.
Right.
I think video games out-earn like movie, TVs, and music combined.
And drugs.
Drugs probably out-earns all four of those combined, including video games. I'm counting video games in the drugs.
Yes, right. Video games are a drug.
Opiate for the masses, baby.
I am the video game generation, as hard as it may be for people to believe, because I'm such a rough and tumble old school curmudgeon, raised in a log cabin, wrestling bears.
In fact, you'd have to put down your joystick to wrestle the bears.
It's true. It's true. I was the target audience, right? 1978, I was 10 years old. And they were trying to... the whole video game industry was directed...
Trying to make you yell at your parents.
That's right.
To get you a console for Christmas.
Pointing directly at me. Don't you want to play Pong? Don't you want to play Space Invaders? And I did.
Look, Mom, did you see this ad in Newsweek?
Well, I was kind of in an interesting situation because my dad was a very early video game franchisee.
Like he owned an arcade?
My dad somehow, and I wish he was alive today because I have a lot of questions that I didn't get answered. When my dad died, I said, you know what? We covered everything. Like I have no regrets. There's nothing that I'm ever going to want to ask my dad that I hadn't already figured out. And then, of course, I had a kid 3 years later, and I was like, I have so many questions that I couldn't have known that I needed the answer to. But now here it is. He died 15 years ago, and I never figured out what his deal was with Pong. But
That's the main thing you would ask.
Yeah,
this is your version of Cats in the Cradle?
In 1973, got the contract to put Pong, tabletop versions of Pong, in the bars on the Air Force Base.
I remember those.
Right?
And the Army bases in Korea had these in the pizza joint.
Yep.
There would be one of these table booths where you could play Defender or something.
Yeah. And they had they looked like a cocktail table. They had a smoked glass top.
Yep.
And a coin thing in the side, and you could, put in your quarter, and then you could play Pong. And
standing up's a bummer.
Standing up's such a bummer, although my dad then also had Air War, which was a kind of biplane combat game that had stand-up consoles. He had some stand-up Pongs.
I'm kind of surprised more sit-down gaming did not ever take off, given that, Vegas puts chairs in front of slot machines.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to get, old people addicted to something stupid. It's pretty easy to get young people addicted to something stupid, too.
And I remember in the arcades there being a certain number of stools that you could kind of scoot over.
Yeah.
if you wanted.
Always more games and people than stools, though.
I remember playing Ms. Pac-Man at least as often in a tabletop console as in a stand-up one.
I thought you were going to say you played Ms. Pac-Man more than Pac-Man.
Well,
because you're such a good feminist.
Ms. Pac-Man's a pretty good game.
It's a better game.
But we then, by 1977, 78, had probably 24 tabletop Pong games and stand-up Air War consoles in our garage. Basically, to get in the garage, you open the door and you had to walk around, skirt this like enormous cluster of these Pong games that are huge pieces of furniture. And they were there until the mid-'80s.
And these are ones that had never gone into the...
No, they had gone in, they'd spent their lives... A lot of them, when I was a kid, like I found the keys, the master key to open the coin boxes. Some of them were still had big containers full of quarters, like that. I would find like
who was supposed to take those out? Not your dad.
Oh, yeah.
Base personnel.
Yeah, or whoever it was that was running the business for him. And what's crazy is that my dad did this all the time. He had these little schemes. Somehow he was Mr. Pong in 75 and didn't translate that into a life of organized crime and
that you know of.
Yeah, he could have been the video game guy.
I always wish I had some kind of George Costanza's dad who always had a hustle.
Yeah.
My dad was not Willie Loman.
Well,
except that he had a briefcase and didn't like his job.
My dad was terrible at the hustle. Somehow he turned this into a liability, like we were schlepping these things around. And I bet you now, in today's market, a tabletop Pong game, it's very hard to find them for sale anywhere. There's a stand-up version of Pong here for $8,000.
Just for an arcade?
Just for an arcade one. You can get, on this website I'm looking at, vintagearcade.net, you can get an Asteroids for $3,100.
Game Room Goodies has a Atari Pong cocktail table arcade game.
Oh, that would probably be it.
For $6,000 or $7,000.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess I wouldn't be putting myself through college again by having a dozen of these, but...
Is this the main thing keeping you from college? Not having enough Pong tables?
Not having enough, because back then you could, this is the thing that young people today don't realize, you could pay for college.
With just a single Pong table.
Yeah, you could just, ship a Pong table, put a Pong table on a dolly, and there's your college.
If Biden doesn't forgive student loans, he should at least send a Pong cocktail table to every community college student in America.
I have to imagine that there are tech billionaires down in San Francisco who have tabletop Pong games in their super cool lofts that they take the Google bus back and forth from. Shouldn't
all those games be really cheap now? There had to have been more arcades unloading old games than there are man-children decorating lofts.
Well, like mid-century modern houses, they had to go through a period of 40 years where nobody cared about them.
So they all got thrown away.
Yeah, they all got thrown away. And whatever happened to the ones that were in my dad's garage, I don't know. I think I came back from college one day and they were all gone. Maybe that's how my college was paid for.
Probably.
But I was there. Man. I was deep in the shit.
You're a gamer.
I was there from the very beginning, I think I went to the first arcade in Anchorage within the first week of it opening. And I remember when they put arcade games in the lobby of the movie theater, and you'd go and just stand in the lobby of the movie theater, not even wanting to see a movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark would be playing right behind you, but all you cared about was Centipede. And I remember it being on the cover of Time magazine and feeling like it was the first time that Time magazine had done a story that was about me, like not just relevant to me, but like about me.
I'm the person of the year. I am Centipede.
Look at me. I'm the face reflected back in the screen of Pac-Man. But of course, video games have a history that goes back a little bit before my era, right? I mean, I was there for the explosion of them. But they really originate a little bit earlier in the early 1970s. That's right, in ancient Sumeria.
Centipedes on cuneiform tablets.
Mm-hmm.
You had to move the asteroid yourself across the table on little tiles, and hyperspace had not yet been invented.
Yeah, Frogger was played with real frogs and real logs.
They didn't have cars back then, of course. What was the first video game if not Pong?
It was Pong, or Pong was the first widely known video.
It just
game.
wasn't built into bar furniture the very first time. Although that would be funny. Imagine if all great inventions were in bar furniture the first time. Like the very first light bulb is Edison being like, what would really make this jukebox a lot better?
Yeah. That is putting a fishing rod in it. We've talked a little bit, I think, about pinball and its and the fact that pinball was illegal in the United States for many decades. Although this may be just me misremembering our show and conflating it with the recent Paul Thomas Anderson movie, Licorice Pizza.
No, I think we talked about pinball. What were the justifications? Was there some Harold Hill-like character going from town to town in California, reminding them that their kids were going to fall into moral turpitude? If they started reading Captain Billy's Whiz Bang and played pinball?
Well, two things. One, pinball was a game that, at least in the early days, the original pinball didn't have paddles.
Yeah, you just watched the ball.
And so it was a thing that had too much element of chance.
Yeah, gaming.
And particularly when there were prizes associated with winning pinball, even though that prize often was just another game, a free game, it was seen as a form of gambling. And the mafia really did get into the pinball business because the coins couldn't really be traced, and the mafia used
it. They were
it
just laundering.
Yeah, as a money laundering game. And then they realized that pinball was so popular that it actually was kind of earning money at the scale of drugs.
So in The Godfather, when they're refusing to get into heroin,
they were in pinball sure.
They're really just putting all their money in
My
pinball.
son speaks when he should listen and take us into pinball.
It's a pinball company pretending to be an olive oil company.
Yeah. So pinball was like LaGuardia, when he was mayor, was super crusader against pinball. And pinball was seen as a mafia kind of front and got this terrible reputation as a corrupter of children. And it wasn't legal in California until 1976.
Yeah, that's Licorice Pizza time for
Yeah. So
to celebrate the bicentennial,
it was like, you know what? Let's bring back the USS Constitution and pinball.
There's something for everyone. Some people will like the tall ships. Some people will want to play. Did they have pinball games based on like 70s entertainment like they do today?
Yeah.
Like, could you go
Kiss.
play One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest pinball or All in the Family pinball?
I remember the Rock Band pinballs, the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road pinball and Kiss Alive. And then there were there were the older ones that were just about, I don't know what, Superman. Who knows what those early pinball games were about? They were about
just about
gambling.
They were about color.
Yeah, they were.
This pinball is about the color blue.
But the video game thing really came out of California. It was an early Silicon Valley product, and a lot of it came out of like old world media companies, and I don't mean media like television or newspaper. I mean media like magnetic tape, as made for recording, old Bing Crosby records.
Bing Crosby's going to die soon. We're going to need something else on this tape. How about centipedes?
So, two of the major companies that were responsible for developing video games as a form of entertainment were Magnavox, who made television sets, and Atari. And
what was Atari making before they were making Pong?
Well, Atari was a company that came out of Ampex, which was a...
Female hygiene?
No, that's Tampax. Ampex, or Tampax, Ampex was a tape manufacturer, and they made recording tape until, the first 2 Long Winters records were made on Ampex tape.
I've seen the Ampex tape on reel to reel in my previous life as a drama tech nerd. What's that called? The AV Squad.
The AV Squad. That's who you were.
I love when these Japanese companies start out just doing something totally different. Yeah. We made guitar picks in the 1890s.
Right.
Today we make everything from dock loading equipment to pickup trucks.
Yeah, guitars and motorcycles.
Right.
Atari, which I always assumed was a Japanese company, was not one.
Wait, it's not? But they look like Mount Fuji.
Well, they do. But Atari was started by 2 American dudes who were working for Ampex in California. And one of the guys, a guy by the name of Nolan K. Bushnell.
He's the only one I know. I don't know who the other guy is.
And you do know Nolan K.
Sure.
How do you know Nolan K. Bushnell?
Just for his Atari-ness. But I guess I thought it was some kind of subsidiary of a Japanese conglomerate or something.
So Nolan K. Bushnell. He's
just what do you call it? A weeaboo.
He is a little bit. There is a weeaboo angle here. Nolan K. Bushnell actually an LDS churchgoer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He went to the University of Utah.
I guess that makes sense because he's a Chuck E. Cheese guy.
That's right.
And U of U was actually a very early computer and computer graphics kind of powerhouse, I think.
Nolan Bushnell was kind of a guy that had a...
We're going to be talking about computers, which means we have to put up with this.
Yeah.
What are we going to call computers in this?
I don't know. Can we just say computer and just let...
What's your work address, John?
What's my work address?
What is she going to show up at your office?
Shush. Well, she sent me a notification to my Alexa app, but it's not to me. It's to my daughter's mother, and she's upstairs right now.
I hope she gets 100 of these during this show.
She's on a job interview.
Oh, is that right?
Boy,
see, this is why we never do video games on this show.
Nolan K. Bushnell was a guy that had a lot of big ideas, and he's working at Ampex, and his first idea was for Chuck E. Cheese. He had the idea of opening an arcade pizza parlor.
I'm going to sell magnetic tape to mice playing the guitar.
So he's sitting at work doing whatever, coming up with magnetic tape I'm sure he was just pushing pencils around. And he's sitting there talking to his coworkers like, one day, man, I'm going to open up a pizza parlor arcade that's going to have like pinball games and whatever, ball toss things.
Big robot rodents.
So he had a coworker whose name was Ted Dabney, and the two of them decide that they're going to quit working at Ampex and they're going to start their own company called Atari. And they name Atari because they're both fans of playing Go.
I knew it.
And Atari is the word that you use in Go to say check.
It's a Go term.
It's a Go term. And so this is the weeaboo angle. They're like, oh man, Japanese, we love playing Go.
And the logo is Mount Fuji. They must have been admiring of the Eastern Asian aesthetic.
So, so they do this. It's just like naming, I don't know an equivalent. What is an equivalent to this?
Today?
Yeah. Where somebody would...
We could name our podcast...
Futahari.
Hunter. Or I don't know.
Hentai show.
Yeah. Remember when we were going to call Omnibus Hentai Show? And then people explained to us, they're going to get disappointed when you guys just talk about starlings the whole time.
Anyway, so Bushnell and Dabney start Atari, and they're very influenced by this game that's being developed at Magnavox called the Magnavox Odyssey. And Magnavox is working on an initial sort of console game as a way of selling televisions. Their idea being, if we had this little outboard console that we could hook up to TVs, it could be kind of like a fun little maybe loss leader. Because Magnavox at the time had brick and mortar dealerships.
Yeah, sure.
Where you would go in to the Magnavox store and buy,
and some oily guy walks you through the year's new TV models.
Exactly, and buy, because televisions and record players and whatnot were big pieces of furniture.
You're going to want the undercoating.
You know what? And you're going to want it to match your bed, and you're going to want it to match all the latest styles. But Magnavox gave a demonstration of their upcoming Odyssey game console, and Bushnell went to it and played what was their early version of Pong, which was basically Pong was a game where the console was capable of putting a white line down the middle of the screen. That was one of its...
A thing you could do with a roll of masking tape, but go on.
Abilities. And then you could have two things user-controlled, the paddles.
The little paddles.
And then the computer could also manage to have a ball go back and forth.
And it's got to be fair, it's got to compute the angle at which the ball bounces.
Well, actually, that came later.
Oh, it can't do that?
So the Magnavox game was just...
You get to watch paddles move?
Pong, you moved the paddles because it had a controller, and you would just send the ball back and forth.
And the ball would go, straight across?
Straight. Well, yeah, you'd hit it and it would go...
There would not be some angle of incidence?
No, I think it went straight across, and then you would move your thing over to there. I mean, it had to have some kind of way of going at an angle, but...
Maybe it just didn't have the thing where, I believe in many iterations of that game, actually the direction and the speed you're going affects the
You can put spin
ball.
on it.
Yeah. And that it probably didn't have.
And Magnavox had a couple of other kind of cool things they were working on. It was the first game that had a light gun component. There was a gun that you could point at the screen of the TV
that early,
and it would register the light of the ball.
You'd think of that as being a later innovation,
right? And I think it was a big selling point. The light gun really read as, the whole thing was cool looking, and actually the Magnavox Odyssey was very 2001: A Space Odyssey looking. It was pretty fresh.
Well, in hindsight, think what a new idea this was. Like, it had only been 20 years since your parents first got a TV in the living room at all. That's the difference between today and the invention of Google.
And it was now...
it's the first thing it can do on it that's not just show you people in a studio somewhere else.
And it's interactive in a way that everybody always wanted the TV to be interactive. You're sitting and yelling at Ricky Ricardo on the TV, and this is maybe the first instance where Ricky Ricardo, in the form of a white ball, would
problematic.
Would reply to you.
Shouldn't he be a Cuban ball?
Yeah, but TVs a lot of them were black and white.
This is a dystopian element in Fahrenheit 451 that everybody wants to watch their shows, but the shows will leave moments for you to talk back,
Yeah.
And I guess the movies were starting to experiment with this a little bit. There were the occasional gimmicky movie would have multiple endings.
Wall.
Yeah, multiple endings or something like that. So the idea that, you would be part of the action, we had already thought of as, part of our doomed future. And now here comes Nolan Bushnell because he can't get funding for...
Well, so Magnavox actually had... there were overlays to some of their games because this Pong technology, the two paddles and the one ball with a line down the middle, they made several games out of it.
And you would put something on the screen?
You'd actually put an overlay on the screen.
Like color forms.
And it would be, and it would turn the game into like a ski game or some other It's
still the same game, basically, right?
Basically.
But now you can see a mountain.
But you would do, they kind of did different things with it. And it's like, can you get down the hill without crashing? But they also the Magnavox game came with other components, like a board that you would put poker chips on, and you could play the game as a component of other games you were playing in Meat Space. Bushnell saw this and thought it was really cool. And as they were putting Atari together, they hired another guy from Ampex by the name of Al Alcorn. And Al was an actual proto-programmer, and said, hey, Bushnell kind of explained, Al had not seen the Magnavox demo, so Bushnell kind of explained what he wanted, like, hey, just as like an exercise, as a little bit of just a training session, why don't you design a game that's like a tennis game, and we'll just see what you come up with.
Did Alcorn not even know? Had he not even seen Magnavox's attempt?
Hadn't seen Magnavox's and didn't know about it. Bushnell just kind of, passed it off as his own idea. But Alcorn did kind of went above and beyond the Call of Duty. And Call of Duty is much later.
He didn't do Call of Duty.
He didn't invent Call of Duty.
He invented Grand Theft Auto 5, confusingly.
But he had more, he had, I guess, access to, a slightly more RAM. And he made the paddle so that it had several zones, right? The inside zone would send the ball straight back. The outside zones would send it back at various angles. And then his other innovation was he made the ball increase in speed as the game went on. And then I think because of just a snafu, his paddles couldn't go all the way to the top or bottom edge. And rather than try and solve the problem, he just left it in as a...
Is that how Pong works? You can try to hit the place where the ball is not returnable?
It can't get all the way.
There's an ace spot if you can get the ball there.
Because because it makes the game more challenging, and he figured, well, you don't want to just play this game endlessly. You want it to have a way, just like later games, like there are places in Galaga where you're just going to die. There's nothing you can do. It's a
good lesson for life.
So he presents this to Bushnell and Dabney, and they realize, oh, this is a sellable game. And they went down to and Al was the first one to actually put the console he built a box for it. He built a stand-up box with controllers.
And it has a screen.
With a screen inside.
Magnavox was like, you'll plug this up to your screen.
Well, this wasn't...
Right. But the original Magnavox idea was you use your pre-existing screen.
You use your television, right? This was a box, and they took it down to a local tavern called Andy Cap's Tavern, and they put the box in the bar, kind of next to some illegal pinball games, and said, let's see how it works. And I think the famous story that probably a lot of people have heard is the game wasn't working after a couple of days, and Al went down to see if he could fix it, and he realized the reason it wasn't working is the coin box was overflowing. They had no way of, they couldn't believe this.
That's the kind of corporate origin story that is rarely true, but I still choose to believe.
I know, isn't that fun? Well, so Magnavox had showed their demo a long time before the thing was actually ready to sell, and it debuted as a product in September of 1972, and Atari came out with their Pong in November of 1972.
Oh, so Magnavox did beat them to market, but only by a couple months.
Only by just the barest edge. Mm-hmm. But the Magnavox had some cool elements. I mean, one of them being the light gun. But the problem with the Magnavox was that at first they only sold them through Magnavox dealerships. And where
kids love to hang out.
Yeah, like, come on by the dealership and
hot dogs and balloons for the kiddies.
And they left the advertising of the console to local dealers. There wasn't a national campaign.
And this always happens with new innovative product. The local dealers don't know how to sell it because they're just middle-aged guys who know how to sell the thing from 15 years ago.
Right.
Is that what happened here?
Yes. And so the console kind of underperformed. A lot of dealers used it as a television sales technique, including saying or implying that it would only work on Magnavox televisions. Mm-hmm. So if you want this, you got to buy the new. And I think the following year they realized we need to explicitly kind of start selling this as a real standalone thing and make it clear to people it'll work on their other TVs. The Magnavox console did take off, and the Atari console also, selling great gangbusters. People really they dug the Pong game and the few other games that were kind of in the family of Pong. And they started to kind of they were at first a novelty. Atari got their original console put in the Sears catalog in 1975. So it became a thing that, you'd want to get your kid for Christmas.
Did Atari and Magnavox ever have any kind of IP disputes over their similar parallel origins or not?
Well, not only did they, but the the idea of Pong was immediately copied by 100 different companies, right? Or not 100, but like there were several Pong games kind of flooding the market.
I mean, today it would be clear that would not be protectable. You know, you've seen a computer, you've seen tennis. You can't just say I made the first computer tennis game. But at the time, it might seem like very original IP.
It was, and Magnavox, although their console, I mean, it sold well, but Magnavox did not keep on top of innovations in video games. Like they kind of got bullied out of the market and by bad business decisions. They're trying to still sell console record players and didn't really, I mean, we'll see in a minute, like they stayed in the game a little while.
This is why there's no Magnavox section at GameStop today.
Right. But what they were successful in doing was suing Atari and other video game companies for property infringement. And what they copyrighted was the idea of a ball going back and forth between two paddles controlled by controllers on your TV.
They got a patent
they did.
on paddle balls.
And they sued several different companies. Atari ended up getting a license from Magnavox for $1 million and
to make them go away
some dollars. But I think Magnavox ended up making $100 million from various video game companies just by enforcing their IP. So in that sense,
the first patent troll.
Pong and Atari kind of blew up, as evidenced by my father being in the Pong game at such an early time. And Bushnell kind of forced Dabney out as the company grew. Bushnell was the guy, was the Zuckerberg who kept rewriting the contract, and Dabney wasn't. You know, it was sort of Dabney who was the original tech person, whereas Bushnell was the big idea guy.
Just like Andrew Garfield?
Yes. And Dabney got written out, and the intellectual property of that company, Dabney's name wasn't on it. And eventually he left the company and sold his stake in it for not very much money, and ended up running a deli and living out in, California. His house burned down in one of those forest fires in the 2015s.
He's still alive?
He died in 2018.
By the way, Bushnell is a lapsed Mormon at this point. So his mean business persona, I cannot take any theological responsibility for.
Well, yeah, as soon as he got into Chuck E. Cheese, I mean, think about how...
As soon as he get in a hot tub with so many beautiful ladies.
Yeah, that's not compatible with Marxism, nor is it compatible with LDS.
We should get shirts that say compatible with Mormonism as well. Yeah. Which of our topics have been compatible with Mormonism?
Boy, I think it's not that many.
Maybe the Oneida cult. I don't know. Yeah,
although, I mean, you made like a skew reference in it that maybe would get you in trouble.
Didn't we? We've done hardly any shows about alcohol, so that's nice.
And when we do shows about alcohol, we come out against it.
Right. This is a dry podcast. That's why we're here in dry King County, Seattle.
So Bushnell, in designing the Atari 2600, which was originally called the Video Computer System or something like that, and eventually we call it the
VCS.
The 2600. He ended up selling Atari to Warner Communications in 1976 in order to get the funding. And Warner installed a new guy as CEO, and Bushnell was out of Atari by 1978 because he was chasing those big Chuck E. Cheese dollars.
Oh, man. He saw, one time he saw a mouse in his kitchen, his eyeballs just turned into dollar signs. He's like, if that mouse was playing a guitar right now.
He was like, when is a mouse when it spins?
Where's my pizza?
So there's a recognition that, I mean, a lot of companies got into building Pong, and there was a kind of flood of consoles and Pong imitators into the market, such that In 1977, there was a glut of companies making, less effective and not and kind of garbage consoles.
It's funny. There's this century-changing tech, and everyone is like, we can use this to make a tennis game. Like everyone thinks that is the one application of this technology. It's just to do like ping pong.
Ping pong.
I mean, it's when Thomas Edison invented the gramophone. I think famously, like music was like very low on the list of things he thought it could be used for. He thought it would be like listening to lectures or something.
Yeah, right. I mean, and that's kind of what happened at first here. And so in 1977, there was actually a kind of video game crash. All of the Pong games that you could sell at Christmas time had been sold, and the consoles didn't really do as much as was promised. And there was kind of on the horizon the sort of home computer, which, I mean, when did the Apple IIe come out? Sort of 70.
I was going to say around 80 or 81. Does it start with 70?
Apple IIe.
I mean, the 2 is going to be late 70s. The 2E is 83.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. So Apple IIs weren't quite... I remember, when did I see my first Apple II?
The Apple II is 77. The Apple II Plus is around 79, I think.
Yeah, I think Apple II Plus was probably the first one I saw. We were playing Oregon Trail on that by 81 at my junior high. So out of the kind of ashes of the video game crash of 77 came the Atari 2600. And the 2600 had it could do a lot more. There were a lot more games.
It would take a cartridge. It was an expandable system.
And there were a lot of other companies kind of trying to get into the act at the same time. Mattel, which we know now is the second largest toy company in the world after Lego Enterprises or whatever.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, Mattel sells everything.
They bought up a lot of their rivals.
They did. They sell the Barbies. They got it all. But also a company called Coleco, which you may recall. One of the things, and the
Connecticut Leather Company.
How did you know that?
It's funny, right? It's like the playing card company that turns into Nintendo.
Yeah, Coleco is short for Connecticut Leather. They were in the business of selling like leather punches and
to daddies.
Yeah, all the tooling to make your cowboy holsters.
They were selling machinery, not actual.
Well, no, they were selling like home kits for people to do leather stuff.
They were selling spirograph to leather daddies. I love it.
They made shoes in World War I. They were famous for their rubber shoe soles. For a while,
rubber.
Yeah, they got into rubber.
Did they change their name to Caruco?
No, they were still Coleco. At one point, they had cornered the market on above ground swimming pools in the United States.
That's just a license to print money. Remember when Michael Corleone wants to get them into above ground swimming pools and the Don won't go for it?
They were in snowmobiles. I mean, they were one of those companies that in the 60s became like Gulf and Western, like a major sort of conglomerate that had a little bit into everything. And Gulf and Western figures in a second. But then in 1976, they got in on the Pong thing and and developed a video game console called the Telstar. They were part of the big Pong crash of 77, but because they were a diversified company, they were able to weather it. But kind of one of the most interesting things about the Atari resurgence was that there were a few people working at Atari who were designing video games, and Atari was now a subsidiary of Warner, and the video game designers became dissatisfied with the way they were being treated by Warner because Warner just was paying them a salary and not giving them any residuals on the games they designed.
So it's work for hire.
Yeah, and they felt like, well, wait a minute, everybody else in media that's working for Warner is being paid according to their success.
Their musical artists and their producers and their actors. And
right.
Got it.
So they punched out of Atari and started a group of game designers and started their own company called Activision. And Activision started making games for Atari.
And the funny thing is you could immediately see that Activision games were better. Like the worst Activision game was maybe better than the best Atari game. And it was almost like they'd figure out things to do with the ROM that the Atari engineers had not figured out. Because, you were obviously very limited in what you could do with those games because they had such a tiny little bit of memory available to you. I don't know, the equivalent of 2K today or something.
Right.
And yet these Activision games were little miracles, better graphics and more involving and more complicated. It wasn't just artistic decisions of, what the player finds more addictive. Like it seemed like technically they were somehow pushing the console. And I guess I had never known that they were disgruntled Atari types who weren't let do good work.
Yeah, and Atari actually sued them, saying you can't do this. This was the first example, I think, of software,
because they hadn't bought a license. They were just like, we know, we
know how to use your console better than you do.
We've reverse engineered your console, yeah.
And Atari lost that, or no, Activision had to pay Atari some kind of licensing fee or some revenue split.
They cut a deal.
And so, yeah, Activision was making Atari games that were better than Atari games.
Pitfall's the best.
But when that kind of world opened up, I mean, Atari was dominating the market. This is kind of post 1979, after the crash, the new consoles that played multiple games, kind of everybody tried to get in on it. And Magnavox launched a new console called the Odyssey 2. Coleco came out with the ColecoVision.
I remember ColecoVision.
Mattel came out with Intellivision.
You had Intellivision, right?
I did have Intellivision.
And it had better graphics, so I was very jealous of my Betamax Intellivision friends.
It did, although I always felt that the disc controller, I got such a blister on my thumb from that disc controller, and I really wanted a joystick.
What was it? It was a rollerball?
You had a handheld, because Intellivision was trying to be slightly more than a video game console. It wanted to also be this other thing. There were games that were supposed to be educational, and the controller had a keypad on it and then a disc that was kind of unlike any other controller. It was touch sensitive. You could go around, you could push the disc down around in a circle and control your device in 360 degrees.
But it's not like it's
control your cursor.
Is it like the top of a roll-on deodorant, basically, or is it?
It wasn't a ball.
Flat? It's flat.
It's flat, and so you weren't rolling it. You were just kind of pushing around the edge, and it had around the edge of the disc there was a plastic rim that was aesthetically pleasing, but you would.
Yeah, I got into video games for the bevels.
Yeah, you'd run your thumb around it, and in the course of playing Star Wars Death Star killer game, it put a huge blister on my thumb. I wanted a 2600 because that's what had all the cool games. Yeah, the graphics were better on an Intellivision, but the numbers tell the story. The Odyssey 2 sold 2 million copies, or 2 million different consoles. All these were profitable. The ColecoVision sold 2 million. The Intellivision sold 3 million. But the Atari 2600 over the course of its life sold 30 million separate consoles. Wow. So it was, more successful by at least 10 times, or 10 to 15 times better performer than the other games. But it was really Activision that introduced the whole universe of separate companies selling games. And at this time, Warner Brothers trying to, they've got a hit on their hands with this Atari game, but Warner is not coming from a game mentality. They're coming from a corporate business structure mentality.
The guys in New York.
They're like, oh, we gotta, let's get some games let's get as many games into this pipeline as we can because we can't lose. They're selling for $30 a pop.
This is what we talked about in the Billy Jack entry. You know, like as soon as the New York money guys realized how to maximize profits, that's all it became.
Right. And the market was suddenly flooded by innumerable other companies throwing every kind of terrible game at the Atari console. And it coined the phrase shovelware.
Shovelware.
Because they were basically just shoveling terrible games at consumers.
Volume,
right. There was actually a game put out by the dog food company Purina. A game called Chase the Chuck Wagon.
It was tied into their product, I assume.
It was if you send in proofs of purchase of Purina dog chow, they would send you at a certain number of proofs of purchase this incredible game Chase the Chuck Wagon, where you would
you remember the commercials, a little tiny covered wagon running under a counter for some reason.
I loved the commercials.
It's the same thing you see with NFTs today, right? Companies that are terrified that they are missing the hot new profit center, that they'll be the last ones to adopt. So suddenly, even though it's the dumbest thing, every product's going to have a tie-in. And it was the same back then with video games. Purina's like, well, we don't want to be the last one of our competitors to not get in on what the young people like.
Turned out they were the only dog food company that had a video game.
Alpo's video game never released.
If you remember the Activision game Kaboom.
I do, the bomb-throwing guy.
The Kaboom, there were, pretty much every video game company came out with a version of Kaboom. There was one called Lost Luggage, where instead of a guy throwing bombs, it was someone at an airport throwing bags.
So it's just clones of existing games.
Clones, so many clones. There was a game that was branded along with the band Journey called Journey Escape.
Oh, I've seen the ad for this.
Do you remember this?
I saw the magazine ad for Journey having a video game.
Yeah, there was also a television ad for Journey's video game that was very popular on MTV at the time.
Wow.
Journey was a huge band, and I think they figured, hey, we better get in on this video game thing. All of this peaked in 1982 with video games absolutely, not just because this is the era of this is the era of video game arcades as well. So by 1982, you could not throw a quarter in any direction without hitting video game as part of the culture.
How big an industry is it? Is it as profitable as?
It became a huge industry by 1982. Video games as an industry. I'm talking about just home console games. By 1982, it was a $3.2 billion business selling home video games. The entire video game industry, including every sort of tie-in to it, and all of the games themselves being sold separately from consoles, and all of the arcade games, was a $42 billion media business that had not existed 10 years prior, or hardly existed at all.
So it seems like that would be bigger than Hollywood, for example. Total domestic grosses of all 1982 movies, under $3 billion. So it's an order of magnitude.
It's a massive, and you would have been what, 10 years old, or 9 or 10?
Yeah.
You remember video games. That would have been a huge part of your elementary school life, right? Knowing at least that they were there. Did your parents give you quarters?
Yeah. Arcades less so. It was really more about consoles. You'd go over to a friend's house and everyone would be playing Atari after school. Whoever had the new cartridge. Less of an arcade scene. That was more like something you saw teens doing in movies.
Correct.
Because we were too, maybe before mom picked you up from the theater or the pizza party, she'd leave you a couple quarters. But I was just young enough to feel like I missed it.
Yeah, and it was a huge part. I mean, I was at that point able to walk home from school. I mean, I guess I always did that, but it was a thing where I could go to the Tasty Freeze on the way home from school and both my parents were at work, so nobody knew where I was.
80s baby.
Too old to have a babysitter. I had a key to the house around my neck on a piece of red twine, and I would go to the Tasty Freeze, and I was not good enough at video games to make a quarter last all afternoon.
Right.
But at the time, you could watch other people play video games, and it was just as fun.
I did that a lot, actually. I mean, it's today it's just Twitch, but we had it too.
Yeah, there was a kid that, wore his baseball hat backwards and could play defender on one quarter for 2 hours, and he had 10 kids standing around looking over his shoulder at the game.
I also had performance anxiety. Like, I'd watch my friend play Zaxxon, who was really good at Zaxxon, and he'd be like, "Okay, your turn." I'd be like, "No, I'm okay.
I'm gonna look like a dummy.
I'm gonna go get nachos."
So the market at this point, everybody trying to get into it. In 1982, there were in June of '82 at a conference, like a Consumer Electronics Conference, there were 100 games available for video games. By December of that same year, there were 400 games available.
And they're bad.
And most of the new ones were bad. Only 10% of the games represented 75% of sales. But people were feeling increasingly ripped off. And Atari...
once you've got the chuck wagon 5 or 6 times,
Exactly. Atari was also kind of, because they were being run at this point by suits who didn't have the vibe, and Activision was kind of schooling them in video game design. Atari, and all along, Atari was licensing games as kind of, if you think about some of the first games like Asteroids or Space Invaders, those were licensed from other companies. Space Invaders licensed from Japan, and it was
Taito or something
from Taito. It was a killer app. Another company that you might think was a Japanese company and was in its origin story is the company Sega. But Sega was purchased in 1969 by Gulf and Western, who also made Harley Davidson motorcycles and everything else. And Gulf and Western also owned Bally and Midway.
They had a arcade wing.
Right. And Bally and Midway were part, if you think about Bally, they ended up owning a bunch of casinos. Like there was a massive mafia connection with those things. But Midway was making a lot of the console games, or I'm sorry, I keep using console to mean whatever that standalone arcade game. That's what I'm trying to say, right? Arcade game. So in 82, all of these companies are predicting that the computer, the home console market is going to be the biggest thing ever for Christmas 82. And they overproduce the number of consoles and cartridges by a massive amount. There are way more consoles and cartridges, most of them of terrible games, than they could possibly sell.
They got a saturation problem at this point too. Everybody's got one. Sure, you could upgrade to, is this one they unveiled the 800? I can't remember.
Atari 400 and 800 came out during this period. Also, Atari made the classic error of licensing a couple of games, Pac-Man and famously E.T. the Extraterrestrial. But the in-house Atari game designers ported those games over, or in the case of E.T., wrote it in a rush, and they were awful. It was a terrible version of Pac-Man, and the E.T. Extraterrestrial game was sort of unplayably bad.
And it was all just top down. It was like, we need to have a game tied into E.T. or Pac-Man. It doesn't matter if they're good iterations of either.
And the licensing fee of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, they paid tens of millions of dollars for the rights to this game based on the hottest movie of the year. And then they made a really piss poor game out of it. But also
at the time, E.T. was the biggest box office hit in history.
It was massive. And you could see where it would be a great game. Yep. I mean, you've got Pac-Man is going around eating dots. Why couldn't E.T. go around?
So you've got crying kids at Christmas.
Yeah, and E.T. could have been going around eating Reese's Pieces and the tie-ins.
There you go.
Oh my God, it would have made billions. But
I got this wrong, by the way. It was the 5200 that was their next generation console that came out in 82.
Right. So the 400 and the 800 were
their Apple II alikes, right?
Atari's entrance into the home computing game. Yeah. And that was another problem. At this point, home computers started to be like the IBM 5150 was massively expensive. It was $1,500 in a time when that was almost $5,000 in modern money. And my mom bought one because she was in computers. So in 81, I had a 5150, and the games on it were terrible. But it could also, it was sold initially, remember, as it wasn't just word processing you could do, it was home accounting.
Yeah, you do your taxes.
That was such a huge part of how they sold those
Isn't that crazy?
Oh, it's going to pay for itself with your tax.
You know what parents loved in the early 80s was making their taxes easier.
That's right. Your home accounting, there's a whole set of programs for it.
Here's your budget.
And I remember having that stuff on the computer and not even having any idea what accounting even was. What was I couldn't use that, but I loved having a computer and doing stuff on it and the idea of games.
And you could see why this stunted the next generation consoles, because the family that's thinking about upgrading their console is going to think, well, a computer will do games and it'll do our budget, and they say it can help with junior school project and
all of that was coming online right about this time. The game companies were kind of, in some cases, unwittingly undercutting their own market by also coming out with personal computers that initially, the games kind of weren't maybe as good. But yeah, when it comes time for mom and dad at Christmas time to choose between a thing that plays this terrible E.T. the Extraterrestrial game or something that can do your home accounting, they're going to pick the thing.
I think a lot of the unlicensed third-party games are also kind of sleazy, right? Like there was actually a level of kind of naughty, porny, and I only heard about this in hindsight, that was really kind of diluting the value of the stuff because, Atari puts out 10 decent cartridges that year and Activision puts out 5 good ones, and then there's 75 third-party ones that are terrible, and some are R-rated.
Some of them worse than terrible. There were a lot of games that only had 3 levels, and then they would sell you there was a game that was like, oh, it's a cookie that's hungry, and then the next one is like, it's a ninja that wants to kill bad guys, and then the next one was like, it's a kangaroo, and it was the same game. It just had.
They're going back to the Magnavox color forms.
Yeah, it was. They just changed the shape of the little guy's head.
For whatever reason, kids can always smell a ripoff too.
Yeah. Well, in 1983, it was like a stock market crash. The market for video games plummeted. Plummeted to the tune of...
where did we start again? What did you say? How many billion in 82?
It was a $42 billion overall market in 82 that dropped to from 42 to 14 billion by 1985. And that includes, that's everything in video games. I think in home console business, the revenue went from 3.2 billion in 83 to 100 million.
Oh my gosh.
In 85.
Isn't that just unprecedented? Like, can you think of anything losing 97% of its value in a matter of a year or two?
Only stocks, I think Bitcoin does it every other week.
But no industry, right? Like, a single discredited, single Enron maybe, but like even buggy whips took longer than that. Even typewriter, nothing collapses to 3% of its former value in a matter of a year or two.
And it was so profound. Atari in that year lost $356 million. They laid off 3,000 people. Magnavox got completely out of the video game business. Famously, and I think there's a documentary about this that kind of made the rounds on the internet a few years ago in 2014. Atari had the legend was 1 million copies of E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Just sitting in warehouses?
It was just sitting in warehouses. And they took them out to the desert by Alamogordo, New Mexico, and buried 1 million video games in the desert.
You said it was a legend, but isn't this true?
Well, so for years, this was the legend, and copies of E.T. the Extraterrestrial were, developing a kind of cult following, or the idea that it was a collectible.
Just like the Edsel.
And in 2014, some documentary filmmakers got permission to go out and dig up the reputed 1 million E.T. the Extraterrestrial games.
You don't want to be digging up 20th century garbage in Alamogordo. I mean...
I know it could be a lot of things. But they dug it up, and it turned out they estimated from what they found that the 1 million games was a total myth. It was really only 728,000 E.T. the Extraterrestrials.
But they really got landfilled?
They really found them, not landfilled, found them in a hole dug specifically for them. They didn't throw them in the garbage.
They just bought cheap land somewhere and put it there?
Yeah, they dug a hole.
Do you have to get what do you call it? Do you have to get like EPA permission to dump 700,000 video games in a hole?
You would today. But in 1983,
let's hear it for the Reagan Revolution.
I think you could get away with it. And so for a few years, there basically was no market for video games. And not only that, but home consoles, the idea of a video game was anathema.
And some of the energy had gone to home computers, but...
a lot of it had.
But, in the toy sector, they would be like, yeah, toys are faddish. It's G.I. Joe's one Christmas and then it's not. It's Cabbage Patch Kids one Christmas and then it's not. But this is a whole entertainment sector that just went away.
And Coleco was able to survive because they were so diversified, building swimming pools and whatnot. But also in 1982, Coleco came out with Cabbage Patch Kids.
Yep. Well, so they briefly staved off disaster.
Right.
But then Cabbage Patch Kids crashed.
They scooted along. Coleco also had kind of the good sense in 1982 that ColecoVision cartridges also could play on 2600s. Wow. Like they could, port over.
You didn't have to get their less successful proprietary console.
Coleco tried to make a personal computer in 1983 called the Coleco Atom. Do you remember this?
ADAM, right?
Yeah.
I've never seen one.
They bought Scrabble. They really, when Cabbage Patch Kids also crashed, Coleco kind of struggled along, but they ended up filing for Chapter 11 in 1988, and Coleco didn't make it. Magnavox, of course, you haven't been to a Magnavox dealership in a long time.
Don't tell me what I haven't done. Does Magnavox still exist as a brand of someone else? I don't even know.
Yeah, Magnavox is still a company, although it's gone through several parent companies. They still make televisions, and
if I go on Amazon, here's a collective remote control they make. Here's
they
some
make
earbuds.
boom boxes,
here's a little stereo.
I think Magnavox for a while got into making displays for the military, so they became they kind of had that military contractor business.
They got money coming in. That explains why their consumer goods looks like nothing you would buy if you were under 75. Like here's a little flip up TV that you can put a DVD in. That I have not seen in the store in 20 years.
Coleco actually had a sort of more varied life throughout this process because Coleco, if you recall, owned the electronic quarterback. So Coleco was the first company to come up with the handheld video game console. Electronic quarterback.
Before Game Boy, the very first one was Coleco, huh?
And then Coleco had those little foldable video game consoles that had Donkey Kong, the little handheld mini arcades.
The little sprites would appear. Boop, boop,
yeah, and I still have an original Donkey Kong Coleco flip tablet thing. So Coleco was kind of diversified, but of course didn't make it through the later end of the crash. In fact, hardly anybody did. There were a lot of personal computers that were also kind of trying to be game consoles, the Commodore 64, the TI-99, and a lot of this kind of got swept up in the connection of home console, home computer, home video game. It was all regarded as a massive fad.
And it seemed inevitable that consoles were done. From now on, you would play video games at home on your Apple or your Commodore or whatever, and this or in the arcade. And no one else will ever buy a dedicated gaming console at home. Is that what happened? Needle scratch sound?
Our arcade video games also really took on a reputation as a place where teens went and smoked marijuana and got into trouble and, went and making out behind the dumpsters. And so parents didn't want, arcades became...
so they were struggling too.
Yeah, disreputable places. And it was...
Not Chuck E. Cheese, though.
No. Still
a wonderful family get
even
together.
Today, Chuck E. Cheese remains
nothing seamy at all.
Like a church for the young.
The carpets are not gross at all. They're clean. No surfaces are sticky. It's amazing in there.
What was interesting was a lot of this was a United States problem. Because a lot of these companies, although we think of them all being from Japan, they were American companies. Sega was, although it originally a Japanese company, owned by an American conglomerate, Sega USA, a separate company, Atari, Activision, Magnavox, Commodore, they were all American companies. And this was an American Christmas of 82 glut.
Does that mean other countries never had the big console adoption, or they never saw it collapse?
When it all happened, the video game crash of 1983 in Japan is known as the Atari crash. But globally, video game consoles continued to sell. And
not saturation yet, probably in a lot of those markets.
Exactly. And still, the home computer would have, although the price of those computers, that first run of home computer, it had become a loss leader. People were selling it for, there she goes again.
You get the Commodore for $100 on sale at Toys R Us or something.
That's right. And so there was that similar problem of like a sense of them not being worth anything, a sense of there being, too many of them and sold too cheaply. They were remaindered, just trying to get them off the shelves. But globally, that wasn't true. There was still a market. And in 1988, a company no less than Nintendo,
I've heard of them,
a Japanese company,
they decided to put a mustache on a plumber, and the rest was history.
They did. They had a product in like a Japan. In Japan, their home market NES, Nintendo NES, was called the Famicom. Presumably,
like family computer. We can't say it. Family, you know what?
Yeah, family computer. And it actually came out in 1983, but didn't suffer the fate of the Atari 2600, but also was a home market product.
It was for the Japanese domestic product.
Yes, and in 85, it was redesigned and released in America as the NES. And it had some pretty cool games. If you remember Super Mario Brothers,
oh baby,
The Legend of Zelda came a little bit later.
Tech Mobile,
Metroid, and
I was genuinely surprised. I remember that my friends were starting to have NES, and my parents got one for my brother, and I was like, I think I had been the exact right age to think, nope, consoles are done. That part of my childhood is over. Why do we have this? Like, I was the exact right age to think that the Atari Shock was the new state of affairs. Well, even though it was only 3 years.
And crucially, Nintendo, when they redesigned it to reintroduce it to the American market, they made it look like a VCR. They made it look like a home entertainment device because VCRs, of course, were being universally adopted at this point. Everybody wanted a VCR. And so rather than looking like a little space age game, they tried to look like a piece of furniture, or a like a TV top.
Yeah, it was a little box, like your cable box or your tuner or whatever.
Exactly. And I was the same as you. I did not make the transition to NES because it came out when I was a junior in high school, and I'd been into video games from the age 10. Or 9 or 10, and I'd played them all the way through junior high and through the first half of high school, and I'd watched them be called a fad, and
you were like, yep, these were lame.
Yeah, I'd had a computer, and the computer kind of was fun as a typewriter, but it couldn't really do anything.
That's true. I was still playing a ton of video games, but on our Atari ST, like our Amiga-alike computer that we had, and my brother would play these console games, and I was just kind of mystified.
Yeah, it just didn't...
It came with a light gun, though.
It came with a light gun.
Got to shoot those ducks.
But it didn't translate to me, and I remember a little bit later on realizing that that the NES was everywhere. People had these in their homes, and I felt like, wow, that's so weird that people are playing these dumb, like, hop over a log and try and grab coins. Like, what? Why is this? Why are kids so dumb? I think is what I thought.
In my day, we had Yar's Revenge, and we liked it.
But by 1988, video games were again a $2.5 billion industry.
So there's just this 3-year crater caused by maybe 100 crappy games, like games so bad they killed what was the potential for a $100 billion industry for 3 years.
For 3 whole years.
Can you imagine?
Then Nintendo kind of sneaks back in to the marketplace, and in 88 controlled 70% of the video game market.
It would be like if for 3 years in the 40s or 50s, like a bunch of dumb Mr. Moto movies came out, and everyone in America was like, nope, we hate the movies. And for 3 years, there was essentially no movies.
No movies.
And then somebody was like, you know what we should do is we should make Rebel Without a Cause or something. And then everyone's like, the movies are back.
Well, or that, like we've been making movies the whole time. Maybe if we just repackaged them as a thing. And so Nintendo, of course, taking over the world, all of a sudden a scrappy little upstart by the name of Sega comes out with the game Sonic the Hedgehog, and we were back off to the races.
They needed a Mario. They needed a little cartoon figurehead.
All of a sudden, this company that had been owned by Gulf and Western and had, was basically associated with Midway pinball games was, back into the video game market. But at that point, it became almost entirely a Japanese form of media.
And it's never ended since then, right? It's been essentially, what would you say, 85? So it's been like almost 40 consecutive years of new consoles appearing and exciting tons of interest in the youth. And I think I'm still kind of checked out from it because of those. My kids will be like, okay, but we've got to get an Xbox and a Wii. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Do we?
What are they, though?
And we've got to get a PlayStation. And I don't know.
But you have a computer.
I know. And I'm just thinking, no, it's 80. To me, it'll always be 82 through 85.
Yeah.
Where it's a dumb extra thing that will go away if you just delay the kids long enough.
Yeah, I sit down and play Joust on my phone and wonder, the first time I ever saw Grand Theft Auto, I was like, well, this game's not very socially responsible. They're stealing cars.
That's a little disrespectful.
Yeah. Heck no, you can't have one of these. I'm 28 years old.
Do you have kids who have ever wanted a console?
No, my daughter, in fact, believes, she really has a very gendered take on video games. She says boys are video gamers.
And that's kind of aggressive if a boy says it, but maybe if she says it like Yas Queen, Slay, I'm not going to waste my time with video games like the boys. I'm going to be a laboratory research scientist.
She means it that they are kind of brain dead. She means it that they can't talk about anything else, that they don't read books, they have no information, they're just boring because all they talk about and think about is video games.
This is not limited to console gaming, of course, and it's something I wonder as an old. But I mean, I guess it doesn't matter if that's mass culture and every single person is talking about video games boringly to you and me, then it's fine.
Yeah. And
they're all on the same page.
There are a couple of girls in her class that she says, oh, and they're gamers too. And couldn't be more dismissive.
And all the guys are like, yeah, finally a cool gamer girl.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what our culture has been saying for the last 15 years. Like, no, there should be cool gamer girls too. I'm a gamer girl. And my daughter's like, no, girls should be reading books and able to talk about things. Boys are a lost cause.
It's a funny idea. It's almost back to some Jane Austen time where it's like, what's actually feminist is if girls would take up cooking, crocheting, and reading. And playing the piano.
Yeah, telling stories and able to sing.
Because the guys are all wasting time. The girls should be in the parlor. And that concludes the video game crash of 1983. Entry 1394.GE4130. Certificate number 24180 in the omnibus. Now, speaking of computer things that crash and will never come back, social media. We are archived on whatever social media platforms survive in your time at Omnibus Project, individually at Ken Jennings and at John Roderick. There was a delightful Futurelings group where those of you millennial and younger can make fun of our attitude toward console gaming. That's pretty much what it's going to be for, I predict, for the next week after this comes out. You could send us physical media, believe it or not. The Postal Service had not yet collapsed in the great walkout of 2031. So you could send those to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington, 98155. Let me see what we have here. I was just at the mail today. This is a postcard that our listener Kathy and her family sent us from Salvation Mountain at whatever the Salton Sea. The squatters place cement beds in the Salton Sea.
Yeah, we were talking about Salvation Mountain by the Slab.
Yes, we would not have known to visit Slab City if it weren't for Omnibus. It's amazing. Wow, we are changing family road trips.
They actually went because they heard the Omnibus. That's great.
Let's make a complete list of places you should visit because we mentioned the Omnibus, and a complete list of places you should not visit.
Futurelings, if you can do that work for us and compile a list of all the places ever mentioned on Omnibus
and rate them in order,
we can actually have an Omnibus tour. Maybe it could be like Atlas Obscura.
For example, a big hole full of ET video game consoles in Alamogordo. Do not visit.
I don't know.
Do not attempt.
I wonder if they covered it back over. I didn't watch the documentary. If they covered it back over or if they just left it open to the sky.
They just keep pouring new video games in there. I think you're going to enjoy this. Brian from Tennessee is bribing us never to make any show with a sexual subject again. Here's a list of shows not approved by Brian. The Usyk, Goat Glands.
Wait a minute. We've done all these shows
Naked
already.
Came the Stranger, Mercancy. These are examples of shows we should not...
I see.
We should not repeat.
Should not have done.
Take whatever they have in common. Or any other shows that have anything to do with genitalia, misspelled, sorry, Brian, or any topic that can induce Ken to say the word dong or penis. I mean, you just wrote me a letter with both those words that you knew, Brian, that I was going to read on air.
Now, did that letter come before or after we did the Merkin episode?
It's this post-Merkin. I'm trying to see if there's have we done anything recently? Omnibus, COVID made Omnibus 150% less horny, I think.
I feel like...
we did Jesus' circumcision.
Right. Again, you probably said dong and penis a few times.
I doubt it, because that's our Lord. I don't think I would have.
Yeah, that's true. But honestly, you love saying dong.
Well, that's what Brian thinks. But he's bribing us with 200 trillion Zimbabwean notes.
I've always wanted to see one of those in my hand.
But are these actually the legal... Because they're printed on this weird silver foil.
They are printed on foil.
Do you think Zimbabwe did this? Or is this like an American collector's item?
No, I think Zimbabwe did this. I think this makes it very hard to copy in a color copier.
It looks like it should be on the cover of National Geographic in the late 80s.
Because it has that shimmery...
Yeah, like guess what?
But if you folded this to put it in your wallet, wouldn't it crack in half?
Like what do you... Maybe the idea is you roll it up like you're some kind of you're running a numbers game.
Listen to that.
Like even rolled up, it doesn't really roll that well.
It sounds like a flexi disc, which I'll probably do as an omnibus soon.
Nope. Brian also does not want me to say the word flexi.
How about moist? Point. How does he feel about moist?
What was the word you didn't like last week? Spume.
Oh, spume.
Do you think Brian doesn't like the word spume?
Tell you what, replace every instance where you would say dong with the word spume.
What about spume in other words? Like, can I say spumoni?
Mm-hmm.
See, these are the kind of things. Brian, you're going to have to...
you can say spumoni.
You're going to have to write us back. We have follow-up.
Wow, we should do a show on spumoni because it's so terrible.
I kind of want to do a show about Neapolitan ice cream for the same reason.
Oh, well, they could be together.
We should do a show about things you liked that you begged your parents for when you were 6, and then it turned out your parents were right, and they're kind of disgusting.
My daughter does that all the time. She's like, oh, there's nothing better than Rocky Road. And I'm like, there's nothing worse than Rocky Road.
What's wrong? What's your beef with Rocky Road? The marshmallows?
I don't want marshmallows.
Yeah, but at least there's a bunch of textures.
It's like bubble tea. I don't want bubbles in my tea.
My brother would always order bubblegum ice cream.
Don't want it.
As a kid, and it's just a mistake.
I don't want ice cream that tastes like cake. Although I do want deodorant that smells like cake.
As long as, well, if they're sponsoring this show, we do. We want cupcakes in our armpits. So thank you for sending that along. You can also, the best way to support the show is not to complain about when John does shows about walrus penises or, as scientists say, walrus dongs.
How many of those sex shows were by me and how many were by you?
1, 2, 3. Here are you. I think Goat Glands was me.
So wait, 3 are me and only 1 is you?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem right.
I think it should be more. I'm actually surprised any of mine. Like Goat Glands is actually not a sexy show at all.
No,
it's just it was an impotence drug.
It has the word glands.
It's the opposite. Yeah, in Tennessee, if you say the word glands, the school board fires you. The best way to support the show is not to complain about glands. Of course, it's to go to patreon.com/omnibusproject. But honestly, if you support the show, you're entitled. You know, you're like a stockholder, and you can come to the meetings and get up to the mic and put your mouth on the mic and be like, I don't think there should be any glands on Omnibus anymore. and we have to listen because you're a Patreon supporter. And in fact, at one of the higher levels of Patreon support, you can suggest a topic for a show. The reason the long omission of video games in Omnibus was rectified by James, who thought we should do a show either about the Atari Crash or the Donkey Kong sleazy guy.
Yeah, Kong.
And we chose...
Dong Kong.
Yeah, we said the word dong again. Sorry, Brian.
The video game crash of 1983, we chose it because it's a Generation X stroker, and also we both lived through it in a way.
Thank you for your support, James.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come, and we wish you many goods and cheese.
I always forget the goods and cheese.
If the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope you come see us often, and that we'll be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.